Hi, welcome. I am Margot, and I am going to be talking today about autonomy in midwifery and why it matters more now than ever. If you don't know, I am a home birth midwife, and I'm also one of the co-founders here at the Indie Birth Association. And I've been talking about Midwifery Reimagined. And I'm really excited about this series. In a lot of ways, it feels sort of like an offering to the universe every week. And I sometimes struggle with being really consistent about putting out content. I usually wait until inspiration has fully taken me over, but I am making myself stick to a schedule and to topics that I pre-planned for the entire series. So we are going to be talking about autonomy in midwifery. This is one of the most important and the most challenging aspects of birth work and midwifery. So what is autonomy? What does that word mean? I feel like it gets thrown around, or maybe you're totally new to this term. But autonomy is the right to self-governance, the ability to make decisions based on personal knowledge, beliefs, and values without coercion or control from external authorities. So, pardon me. If you know anything about indie birth, you maybe have heard our definition, or maybe you've been around for a long time and you're like, wait, I actually don't know what the definition of an indie birth is. And I'll probably get a few of the words mixed up, but in indie birth, as we have defined it, is a birth experience arising from your own inner truth. Oh man, I'm gonna totally butcher it. Sorry, I'll put it in the show notes. But basically, yes, autonomy is the core piece of it, making choices in alignment with your own inner truth, not looking to the outside for help making those choices, and autonomous and free are the last two words in the definition. So that's very much central to the work that we do here. It's funny, it's like it used to be emblazoned somewhere in my brain. I have a t-shirt that has the definition on it. Sorry. It is good though. So like I said, I'll post in the show notes. There's a lot of overlap here is what I'm saying. And that's why I'm talking about this, because without autonomy, we do not have a healthy midwifery and birth ecosystem. So for midwives, what this looks like is the ability to practice freely based on deep knowledge and experience rather than regulations and protocols dictated by the state or other institutions. And for mothers, this looks like the ability to make truly informed choices about their pregnancy and birth without pressure, fear, or unnecessary intervention. So autonomy is not just a nice idea. Like I said, it's essential for safe, sacred, sovereign birth experiences. And that's what we're going to talk about. So high level, I want to talk about what this looks like a little bit more in depth for midwives. So if we zoom out and we're looking at sort of the entire birth ecosystem here in the United States, at least, and it looks very similar in other places around the world, but I'm just the most familiar with where I live. This looks like choosing the path of education that makes sense for each midwife. So right now in the United States, there's a push for homogenization of midwifery education. There's a push for legitimacy and accreditation, specifically through MEAC, MEAC, which maybe I should do a whole video about. It's pretty sinister and dark, in my opinion, what they are trying to do and what they've done to midwifery education over the last few decades. They're trying to standardize it, and also, be recognized by an institution like the Department of Education, so that midwives' education can all be one way at a federal level, and there's also international standards that are happening as well. I'm not opposed to midwives being educated and having a base level of knowledge, but I do not think that it makes sense to dictate blanket, have a blanket dictate about what that means or how that looks for entire countries or for the whole world. I think that really overrides a lot of cultural competency and cultural specificity and location specificity around what works in different places. Not that birth is different, but people are different and the culture is different in different places. So it doesn't make sense to me that we would say there's one way to be educated as a midwife and this is the only pathway. And if you don't do this and then you practice as a midwife, there will be serious consequences. That does not make sense to me. Also at the high level, this looks like the ability to practice outside of, rules, regulations, licensing requirements. For me, this looks like there being voluntary licensure and transparency. So if somebody wants to be licensed, there can be a mechanism for that. If somebody does not want to be licensed, then they also have the ability to do that. And both parties, both types of midwives should be transparent about who they are, what their education was like, what their experience has been like, and what kind of rules and regulations they are beholden to, if any. And at the high level, this also to me means resisting the medicalization of midwifery, which I see the standardization of the education of midwives as part of this, which is one of the reasons that I don't like it. So not allowing hospitals, policies, or mainstream standards to dictate care when midwives have been providing care to women for a very, very long time. And there are emerging technologies, there are emerging, there is emerging research that we do need to be made aware of, and we need to implement those or at least wrestle with them and understand how they may or may not inform our care. But at the end of the day, midwifery is in my opinion, is a living, breathing art form. And it is a skill. There is science, but there's also so much art and wisdom and intuition involved. And so to reduce it down to sort of the black and white, hyper medicalized version that is being pushed is an erosion of the autonomy of midwives. So day to day, what does this look like in practice for midwives? This looks like building deep trust with the women that we serve. So relationships are the guiding light, not policies. So this looks like having long prenatal appointments and having real conversations beyond, the checkbox, different aspects of prenatal care that are so common. So, often we're like, do you have any visual disturbances? What do you weigh? We weigh people. What's your blood pressure? What position is your baby in? And we can still do all of those things, but real autonomous midwifery requires deep trust, and that usually goes beyond sort of these surface level, just physical aspects of care. Providing care based on intuition, experience, and wisdom. I've already talked a little bit about this. So again, just not operating out of, concern for liability or a checklist or rigid rules and regulations. So another way of putting this is offering individualized woman-led support. So honoring that no two pregnancies and births are the same, even with the same woman in front of you. So you could help someone through several pregnancies, and the care that you provide her might look different for each of them. And woman-led, I think, is a really important piece of this. So operating in a way where the midwife has autonomy and the mother has autonomy, which we're going to talk more about in a moment here, is essential. So the woman gets to lead, and the woman always is the boss and the final say of whatever she would like done or not to her, how she would like to approach her pregnancy. Every choice is hers. And I think this is really crucial. This is something that we absolutely integrate into our midwifery trainings here at Indie Birth. Continuous self-reflection and personal growth for birth workers. So a truly autonomous midwife, in order to continue practicing in this way, is always needing to work on her own internal fears, biases, conditioning, and be really self-reflective. I actually did an exit interview for one of our midwifery school students yesterday, and I asked her what her favorite part was about the program. And I feel like 99% of people that have gone through our program are alumni, she said, the self-reflection. I think the way she put it was, you can learn skills anywhere, which is true. The way we teach them is cooler, of course, but you can learn skills anywhere, but the self-reflection piece and tying it all together and always coming back to what do I think, what do I believe, is really crucial. So for example, We teach the skills of managing a postpartum hemorrhage when someone is bleeding too much after birth. But what we do in the course where we teach this, and anytime we teach it live, is we ask people to reflect on all the different research, all the different ways that one could approach a postpartum hemorrhage, the different tools, the different techniques, medications, herbs, acupuncture, all of it. Like, we sort of provide a smorgasbord, so to speak, a buffet of options and ideas and videos and, stories from different practitioners. And we don't tell you, okay, when somebody's having a hemorrhage, here's what you do. You do this, 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 and that in this order, following this flow chart. We encourage you to either create your own flow chart or just allow there to be a little bit of messiness in the approach, because it depends on the situation. It depends on the woman. It depends on what you have available. And so oftentimes our students will make the flow chart. They'll say, okay, based on everything I've learned, here's how I think I would approach this. And maybe they've done an apprenticeship, or they're in an apprenticeship and they're incorporating also what they've seen their preceptor use. And then they usually say, I have this flow chart, but I'm never going to use this, am I? And it's like, no. The process of putting it together is important. You're, cementing in really important ideas, and you're building confidence that you know how you would approach this potentially. But in real life, this is going to look different every time. So that's sort of a side tangent, but I think that's definitely part of, what we teach here is more of a messy midwifery, as opposed to this neat and tidy, hyper-controlled black and white style of midwifery, which allows autonomy in the moment for us to make those choices about how we want to proceed. Okay. How does autonomy look for mothers? I want to do the big picture, zoomed out, kind of philosophical piece first, and then we're going to look at what does that look like in real life as well. So high level, this means rejecting the idea, this is for mothers, rejecting the idea that someone else knows best about their body and baby, taking full responsibility for their pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience. I think I want to say more about that, but I might circle back. Educating themselves beyond what's presented by the mainstream medical system. So really, again, taking responsibility to understand the process and understand your own perspective on the process. And recognizing that birth is a deeply personal, spiritual, and political act, not just a medical event. And we often say birth is not a medical event. And I mostly would stand behind that. Sometimes birth is a medical event. So sometimes I feel a little funny saying point blank, birth is not a medical event. Birth is usually not a medical event, but it is always a personal, spiritual, and political event. So I want to circle back to this idea of taking full responsibility, because I think it's something that gets talked about. It's a phrase that's used a lot in influencer culture too, or sometimes I call them the birth celebrities on Instagram, people who talk a lot about birth but don't actually know a lot often. And so what does that mean, taking full responsibility? That means that, conversely, I guess, let's start there, conversely, and I know that I felt this and grew up in this myself, this idea that our bodies and our health aren't really ours. They are something that we outsource to doctors. So you show up to your annual visit, you do whatever you're told, they tell you to go to see a specialist, you do it. You just do what you're told. And if you follow the instructions, the idea is that you then will be as healthy as you could possibly be. As opposed to being no, I actually take responsibility for my own health. I need to understand as much as I possibly can about anything that's going on with my body. I need to be in tune with my body, and I can get external support from experts. But at the end of the day, this is my body, and I have to make the choices that are right for me. And I'm the only one who lives inside of this crazy meat suit. And so I ultimately know more about what might be right for me than someone who, even if they're an expert, doesn't have that same lived experience. So taking full responsibility means all of these choices are mine. I can ask for people's support and opinions. I can even follow their opinion, their suggestions if I choose to. At the end of the day, no matter what, the outcome is not in anybody's control, theirs or mine. And I have to just take full responsibility for that. I have to sit in the knowledge that whatever the outcome is, I'm not going to blame someone else. And I think I would extend this to I don't even need to necessarily blame myself, right? Like, we're all making the best choices we can with the knowledge we have and the experience we have. And so sort of taking blame out of the equation and being like, I'm responsible for my choice making. And the secondary piece of this then is kind of letting the outcome be what it is without blame. And definitely not blaming midwives, definitely not blaming doctors, and not blaming anything external for your own experience. So day to day, what does this look like? What's the practical application? This looks like women making informed choices about their own prenatal care. So knowing when and why they will accept or decline interventions, like different testing, ultrasounds, that sort of thing. Asking questions of their providers if they have them, and expecting real answers, not settling for, this is just what we do kind of explanations. Deciding actively where and with whom to give birth. This is kind of the first place that most American women get off the path of self-responsibility and kind of get off the path of autonomy. They just call whatever doctor they maybe planned to once they were pregnant, maybe their OB that they've already had, or they call whoever their friends or the Facebook group said is a good place to call. And there's not a lot of conscious, active thought in terms of where do I want to give birth, who do I want to be there? And that's one of the most important questions. And so skipping that often leads to people coming back to it once they realize oh no, I didn't realize how important this choice was going to be. Or the second pregnancy, they kind of, want to do a do-over, and they're like, oh, last time I just did whatever. This time I need to be a little bit more selective. So that is a huge, if you're a birth worker out there, this is something we really need to be educating our communities about. This also looks like autonomy for women looks like refusing to be rushed, coerced, or pressured into decisions, and recognizing red flags when autonomy, is being stripped away in different scenarios, and saying no, very clearly, this is not going to happen. And either, using those conflict resolution skills in the moment, or finding a different provider if that's an option. And then trusting her intuition over external validation. So really learning to listen deeply to her body and her baby rather than outsourcing decisions. And this is a spectrum, right? So sometimes we have the capacity to do this, and sometimes we don't. And some people have more capacity than others, just because they've maybe been working on this for many years and doing internal, emotional, spiritual work. And that's okay. So I just want to say too, I don't actually have judgment about this. There are women who have so much on their plate and so little resources that the idea that they would kind of take on an autonomous pregnancy experience or an autonomous birth experience on top of all of that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, although I've also seen people do miraculous things. So I'm just saying, I have compassion for people who feel I kind of don't have the bandwidth to do this, and I need to do some outsourcing. I also get that. And like I said, it's a spectrum. So there's moments, even I can think of moments in births where someone who had been making every single choice was totally in her power, would maybe look to me and say I don't know what to do. You need to tell me what to do in this single moment. And that there is space for that too. I think within autonomy, there can be blips and moments where we lean on each other. Okay. So let's also talk a little bit about how autonomy is being eroded in modern birth work. And we've talked a little bit about some of these things already, but they need more space in the world, right? Put it out there into the YouTube universe. This might be totally new information or thoughts for some of you. So licensing and regulation is number one on my list. Many midwives, like most midwives in the United States, are licensed, and they have signed on the dotted line that they are going to follow state protocols rather than their own wisdom. And that is, hopefully if I put it in those terms, it's like, wait, what? Like, that's nuts. 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, like, midwives existed, and I'm sure there are examples of them being controlled and having less autonomy at different points in time in history. But for the vast majority of human history, midwives have had autonomy. They've been able to serve women in the way that made sense for their community, and midwifery was passed down from midwife to midwife, and that was that. Now, within just a few generations, midwives, by and large, are licensed by the government and are told what they are allowed to do or not do. And, my inner Ron Swanson really gets fired up about this because why? Like, has this actually made midwifery better? Has this made midwifery safer? I would argue, no, it has not. If anything, it has just made it less accessible. It's made it harder to become a midwife, and it's made it harder to practice midwifery in a way that really honors both the midwife and the mother's autonomy. So I am definitely anti-licensing, or at least pro-voluntary licensure. Okay. Hospital policies and standardization are sort of not the other side of the coin, but this is a parallel conversation, just not one that I have had to do a whole lot with as a home birth midwife, aside from when I've needed to transport with people. But in the hospitals, birth has become a one-size-fits-all system rather than an individualized experience. And there are places that are doing better. There are hospitals that are doing better and are honoring women's autonomy more and more. And that is really exciting to see and to hear about. I just this week have been privy to someone who, I haven't heard the full birth story, but it sounds like she had a really beautiful undisturbed birth in the hospital with hypertension after she'd been planning a home birth. And I am excited to hear more about it. I think she had to work really hard and be very energetically clear about what she wanted, but it sounds like for the most part she got what she wanted even in that setting. And so autonomy is being restored in some places for sure, but by and large, over the last few decades, 100 years, let's say, autonomy has really become stripped from birth in hospitals because of policies and standardization, sort of cover your ass kind of tactics, and very defensive medicine is what this is called, right? When they're making choices based on whether or not they are going to get sued rather than what actually makes sense in the moment and what the woman in front of them actually wants. There still is a ton. I don't want to make it sound like everything's rainbows and unicorns at the hospitals right now. There are still so many, non-evidence-based practices happening, which is not what we're talking about today. But there are so many instances of coercion, both large and small, and this often looks benign from the outside because it will look maybe like telling a woman, hey, like the next thing we would do if your baby's measuring small, let's say, is we're going to schedule another ultrasound. And there is no conversation about the evidence behind that. There's no conversation about the risks associated, not just physically, but medically, kind of like the cascade of interventions that could happen if we keep doing ultrasounds and seeing different things. Like every ultrasound gives us another opportunity to see something that might be wrong but actually ends up not being wrong. A lot of false positives happen, and that has real life impacts on people emotionally and like in their day-to-day life, their enjoyment of their pregnancy. Like these are not small risks, And so a lot of these choices, testing, intervention, procedures, they are not explained fully. They're not talked about in a way that like it's an option. It is usually more presented as, this is the thing we do next. So when would you like to do it? Instead of, here's what I think we should do. Here's why. Here's the information that we might be able to get from it. Here's the false positive rate. Here's the false negative rate. Here's what we're going to do with the information from this test. And is this still something you want to do? It's not framed as, would you like to do this? Informed choice is what we would call that. And I'm sure I'll talk about that on another video. It's more presented as, something they'd have to opt out of as opposed to opt into. So I'm really an advocate for a system where everything is something that someone opts into. And so, this is a good moment to talk about this. So, when I do a prenatal appointment with somebody, a lot of people in sort of like the autonomous midwifery world or like the birth keeper world, they might approach this differently. And so I think this is really important. I do not offer things. I do not offer things. I don't, show up to someone's house or have them to my office and do nothing but talk. I say something like, do you want me to take your blood pressure today? Do you want to talk about your weight today? Do you want me to feel your belly today? It's, do you want me to? And this is actually kind of a cool story, an interesting story. There was a nurse at the hospital where I had my midwifery practice, and her job was to make birth better in the hospital. She was trying to revamp kind of like the image of this hospital and their labor options, working with the nurses and doctors to make it more, friendly to women who wanted an undisturbed natural experience. So she talked to the midwives and doulas in the area and was asking for feedback. So this is really cool. I was impressed that this was even happening. This was a couple years ago. And she said, yeah, we're really, really honing in on informed consent and making sure that we have it every step of the way with people. And I said, that's amazing, but I want to point out that that's not, you still have some blind spots. I said, when I meet with someone for a prenatal, or if they're in labor, and this is like half true, because if somebody's in labor and they've had a normal blood pressure their whole pregnancy, I basically don't ever offer to take their blood pressure unless it's a really, really long birth or there's some sign that maybe we should be paying more attention to their blood pressure. Maybe they've got some weird headache or they've got some weird visual stuff. Like, that's never happened. But if that did happen, I would totally take their blood pressure, or I'd offer to. So backing up a little, I told this nurse that, it has been my experience that someone in labor usually has a blood pressure cuff already attached to them, and it automatically takes it every 30 minutes, and there's no real discussion about that. And I said, conversely, what it could look like is saying, hey, is it okay if I take your blood pressure? Would you like, or not even is it okay, would you like me to take your blood pressure? And she said, oh, but what if someone says no? I said, yeah, they might say no. Like, I'm someone who would say no. I don't want you to do that right now, actually. That information doesn't feel helpful to me because I know that my blood pressure was fine before labor. I don't want it taken during labor. And she said, well, then what if we miss, and this was, in the context of both birth and at a prenatal visit, what if we miss someone's high blood pressure? And I said, yeah, what if you do? You could explain to someone, hey, if we miss that you have high blood pressure, there could be some pretty serious outcomes. We might miss that you are trending that way, and we might not notice that you have preeclampsia until it's already pretty serious, or, whatever. You could explain all of that, and then at the end of the day, that person is still an adult human being who gets to decide. And so I thought it was a really interesting example of how it is getting better in the hospitals in general, especially in more metro areas, larger areas, more progressive areas. And at the same time, there is a limit, there's a line that they still aren't willing to cross and that they still become uncomfortable at. And it was unfathomable to this nurse that we would let someone decide whether or not they wanted their blood pressure taken at prenatals or in labor. And we never did come to an agreement around this. I don't know if she even took that feedback to the team, but at the end of the day, I think it was a really great conversation and maybe planted a seed, and also, was a great story to illustrate some of these things to all of you lovely people. Okay. What else is eroding autonomy? The algorithmic birth model. So as much as I really love AI for some things, and actually it might be really amazing in the birth space. Like there's some really cool things happening, and I'm not like a never person. Like I will wait and see what kind of tools come out and judge each one on its own merits. But things like risk calculators, so like if somebody has heard of like a VBAC calculator, basically they plug in some different metrics, some different data from the woman, and decide what her likelihood is of having a vaginal birth after having had a previous cesarean. And it has to be over a certain percentage in order for them to allow her to try to have a vaginal birth as opposed to a repeat cesarean. So that is the kind of tool that I'm like, absolutely not. Well, I'm not opposed to the tool itself. I'm opposed to it then informing whether or not somebody is allowed to do something. That's where I have an issue with it. I think it could be an interesting tool to say like, hey, you have a 70% chance. Is that still something you want to do? Like, how will you feel if you're in the 30% who ends up having another cesarean? Like, we could have those conversations. And sometimes these risk calculators might be interesting or useful. But, a very first question would be, do you even want to engage with this risk calculator? Would you like to do this today? Would this information be helpful to you? As opposed to, this is what we do at every first visit for someone who is interested in a VBAC. And if you are below 60% or 70% chance, we will not allow you to have a trial of labor. So this algorithmic birth model is problematic for these reasons, where certain information means then this has to happen, that has to happen, this blood pressure means this happens, or the baby being small means this happens automatically, and that these workflows, these flowcharts rather, are automatically assumed to be the thing that you're going to do, as opposed to using the information and critically thinking about it and weighing in as an expert, and then letting the woman ask questions, sit with it and make a decision on her own, right? So this sort of automatic, it's like a waterfall, right? This automatic, or ping pong, what am I trying to say? You know what I mean? Like the gamer's like, ding, 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 ding. It's this automatic progression based on data that sometimes is faulty, that is very problematic, and it is taking autonomy both from practitioners who are like, this doesn't make sense in this scenario, but the computer told me I have to do this then, or my policies or my boss said in this situation I have to do XYZ, versus like I just described, like a true informed choice conversation. The algorithm is taking that autonomy from the practitioners and also from women, or at least making it much harder to access autonomy. The last one is just fear-based models of birth. So women are told birth is dangerous, practitioners are told birth is dangerous, and that they need to be saved. Women need to be saved by experts. And it's hard for autonomy to flourish in an environment of fear, as opposed to an environment of love. So let's do a love-based model of birth. Why don't we? Okay, so midwifery is meant to serve women, not institutions. That's a takeaway that I really want to send you off with. Birth is one of the most powerful moments in a woman's life, and it should be hers to own, hers to take responsibility for. The triumphs, the failures, the struggles, the celebration, like all of it, it's hers, it's not ours. And the more that we give away our autonomy, the more we normalize birth being controlled by systems rather than by women, by the women birthing and the women who are birth workers providing love and care. So if midwifery loses autonomy, it's going to lose its soul. And that's a big deal to me. So I would love to hear from you in the comments. What does autonomy in midwifery mean to you? I would extend that to also say in midwifery and birth. What does that mean to you? And where do you see autonomy being lost in birth and in midwifery, and how can we reclaim it? I genuinely would love to hear your ideas, because I think the way out of this mess is through conversation, through inspiration, and, you know, through innovation, creating something new, because we're not going to go back to how things were. Like, things are changing every single day in birth and midwifery. But what do we want to create? What is this new, beautiful, this is what I talked about another week. Like, what is this new, beautiful, reimagined midwifery? How does it look? How does it feel? What are the tools and skills that we need so that we can really flourish and thrive? So I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, or you can always email me at margo@indiebirth.org, and I'll be back next week with a different topic. So make sure you subscribe. I don't know where the thing is. Subscribe, click the bell, something, right? And like the video if you liked it. All of these things are very helpful. Share this video with others that you think might benefit from this conversation. Maybe share it and watch it, and then like talk about it with your local birth worker group. That'd be cool. And until next time, I hope you have a beautiful bunch of days. Bye.